Every day as we stand up for citizens' rights in court, we defend the Constitution, and today we celebrate the 4th of July by reading the Declaration of Independence. Remember this, that the Declaration was a starting point, not the finish line. And the Declaration led us to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, later to the Civil War amendments and post that. And it stands for itself. And what we're going to do is each reader is going to read a section, starting with our defense bar, Peter Hughes, and each person will announce that they are reading for several of the signers. There's 50-something signers. Each one will read 2 or 3 names. And so, without any further ado, wait, there's a big truck coming.
Congress on July 4th.
Should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed.
For Button, Gwinnett, Lyman Hall, and John Hancock, but when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security.
For Benjamin Harrison and John Hart, such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpation, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states.
For Joseph Hughes and Thomas Hayward Jr., to prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them.
For William Cooper, Stephen Hopkins, and Francis Hopkinson, he has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the
Jefferson, primary drafter of the Constitution, and Francis Lightfoot Lee of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and Samuel Huntington of Connecticut. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within.
For Richard Henry Lee, Francis Lewis, and Philip Livingston, he has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers.
For Thomas Lynch Jr. and Thomas McCain, he has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount in payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance.
For Arthur Middleton and Lewis Morris, he has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has effected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power.
For Robert Morris and John Morton, he has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent.
For the signers Thomas Nelson Jr. and William Paca, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies.
For Robert Treat Payne, John Penn, and George Reed, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us.
Caesar Rodney, George Ross, and Benjamin Russ. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation.
For Edward Rutledge and Roger Sherman, he has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands.
For James Smith and Richard Stockton, he has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and he has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages whose new ruled warfare is undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and religions.
For Thomas Stone and George Taylor, in every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people.
For Matthew Gordon and George Walton, nor have we been wanting in attention to our British brethren. We
we have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here.
For William Whipple and William Williams, we've appealed to their native justice and magnanimity. We have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence.
For James Wilson and John Witherspoon, they too have been deaf to the voices of justice and of consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends.
Now all of us will read together the very last section, and I invite anyone who wants to come on up and read with us. And this is, of course, for the signers Oliver Wolcott and George Wythe, but also for everyone who's lived in this country, for the immigrants, the slaves, the native people, those oppressed, and those who have stood up for the oppressed. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America,
in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may have a right to do. And for the support of the Declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
All right. On to the battlefield. Thank you very much, readers. That was wonderful. And let's go protect the Constitution. All right.